That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day became a story the whole community tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here we show that behind struggle and silence, there are still human hearts. The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the streets of the old industrial town into slick mirrors that reflected the grey sky above. It was the kind of downpour that seeped through every layer of clothing, chilling the bones and blurring the edges of the world. Headlights cut through the haze like fleeting hopes, their beams slicing the darkness before dissolving into the mist. The air carried the sharp tang of wet asphalt and distant exhaust, mingling with the faint metallic scent of impending storm. In the heart of this somber tableau, a lone figure huddled under the overhang of a crumbling bridge, her thin jacket no match for the wind that whispered through the iron girders. Her name was Ilara, though few knew it or cared to. At 16, she was an orphan, adrift in a city that had long forgotten her. The group home she'd fled 2 years ago was a memory she pushed down deep, a place of echoing shouts and locked doors that had taught her the world's indifference. Now, she survived on scraps from alley dumpsters and the occasional kindness of strangers who averted their eyes as they handed her a half-eaten sandwich. Ilara moved like a shadow, her dark hair matted from the rain, her green eyes sharp with the wariness of someone who had learned to expect nothing but loss. She carried guilt like an invisible weight, a younger brother's face haunting her dreams, the one she'd failed to protect before the system tore them apart. It was that guilt that kept her moving, kept her from sinking into the despair that claimed so many like her. She tried to be invisible, blending into the rain-swept corners, but invisibility came at a cost. Isolation so profound it echoed in the hollow of her chest. That morning, as the clock ticked past 7, Ilara had ventured out from her makeshift shelter beneath the bridge, drawn by the rumble of traffic on the elevated highway above. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but the roads remained treacherous, puddles pooling like dark secrets on the cracked pavement. She clutched a tattered backpack to her side, its contents meager. A worn blanket, a dog-eared book of poetry she'd found discarded, and a single photo of her brother, edges frayed from too many anxious touches. Her boots squelched against the sidewalk as she headed toward the edge of town, where the soup kitchen opened its doors at dawn. The air grew heavier with the scent of damp earth and faint smoke from nearby factories, a reminder of the lives grinding on in quiet desperation. Ilara's world was one of quiet observations, pieced together from the fragments she glimpsed through rain-streaked windows. She saw the hurried commuters in their heated cars, their faces etched with the fatigue of routines that promised security but delivered only exhaustion. She noticed the shop owners wiping condensation from their glass fronts, their movements efficient, yet tinged with a subtle loneliness. Society, in its rush, misjudged her kind, saw them as burdens, as fleeting nuisances rather than souls battered by circumstance. To the passers-by, Ilara was just another street kid, her presence a blemish on the orderly facade of the town. They didn't see the moral core that burned steadily within her, the unyielding goodness that had survived the fractures of her past. She ran from the shadows of abandonment, from the night her brother had been taken away, screaming her name. That scream still echoed in her nightmares, a reminder that she could never fully escape the weight of what she'd lost. As she crossed the intersection near the old mill district, the world shifted in an instant. The screech of tires pierced the steady patter of rain, a sound so raw it halted her breath. Time slowed, the drizzle hanging in the air like suspended tears. A delivery truck, its brakes failing on the slick incline, barreled through a red light, slamming into a sedan with a thunderous crunch of metal and glass. The impact reverberated through the street, sending shards skittering across the pavement like shattered promises. Steam hissed from the crumpled hood, and the acrid smell of burning rubber clawed at the air. Horns blared in the distance, but up close there was only the groan of twisting steel and the faint whimpered cry from within the wreckage. Ilara froze, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The sedan lay tilted against a lamppost, its driver's side crushed inward, rain pooling in the dents. Bystanders emerged from nearby buildings, their faces pale masks of shock, phones clutched in trembling hands as they dialed for help. But no one moved closer. The truck's cab was empty, the driver having fled into the storm, leaving behind a scene of chaos. Whispers rippled through the gathering crowd. "It's bad," one man muttered, his voice thick with hesitation. "Wait for the professionals." Fear held them back. The danger of live wires, leaking fuel, the unknown perils of the mangled interior. The air thrummed with their indecision, breaths coming in shallow bursts, the collective heartbeat of a society trained to observe rather than act. Inside the sedan, through the fractured windshield, Ilara saw it. A small form strapped in the back seat, no more than 5 or 6 years old. The child, a boy with tousled blonde hair, stirred weakly, his tiny hands pressing against the window, eyes wide with terror. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, mixing with the rain that seeped through the cracks. His cries were muffled, growing fainter, a desperate plea swallowed by the storm. Ilara's breath caught, her own past surging forward like a tidal wave. That cry? It was her brother's all those years ago, when the world had failed him. Guilt twisted in her gut, sharp and unrelenting. Everyone else stood paralyzed, their moral compasses flickering in the face of risk. But Ilara, the overlooked orphan who asked for nothing, felt the pull she could not ignore. Her hands trembled as she dropped her backpack, the photo of her brother spilling onto the wet ground. She couldn't run this time, not from this. With a resolve that belied her fragile frame, Ilara pushed through the crowd, ignoring the shouts of caution. The rain stung her face as she approached the wreckage, the heat from the engine warming her chilled skin, even as fear coiled in her stomach. The door was jammed, metal warped and unyielding. She gripped the handle, her knuckles whitening, and pulled with everything she had, muscles straining, breath ragged. A groan escaped her lips, mingling with the child's whimpers. Inch by inch, the door gave way, the scent of gasoline thick and ominous. She reached in, her arms aching, wrapping them around the boy as carefully as she could. His small body was limp against her, warm and fragile, his heartbeat fluttering like a moth against her chest. As sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, Ilara stumbled back from the car, the child clutched to her soaked chest. The crowd watched in stunned silence, their judgments shifting in that moment from dismissal to awe. But for Ilara, there was no time for their reactions. She held him close, whispering words she wished someone had said to her brother, "It's okay, I've got you." The rain continued to fall, washing away the blood, but not the tremor in her hands or the quiet heroism that had just begun to unfold. Little did she know, this act would draw her into a world of fluorescent lights and antiseptic resolve, where the misunderstood guardians of life would see in her a reflection of their own hidden wounds. The ambulance's wail cut through the rain like a lifeline, red and blue lights pulsing against the sodden streets, casting erratic shadows on the faces of the onlookers. Ilara knelt on the slick pavement, the boy's small frame pressed against her, his shallow breaths warm against her neck. The child's eyes fluttered, unfocused, as the metallic tang of blood mingled with the ozone scent of the storm. Her arms ached from the effort of pulling him free, but she held him steady, her own heart thundering in sync with the distant rotor hum of an approaching helicopter, routine for such wrecks, though it felt like the sky itself was bearing witness. Paramedics burst from the vehicle, their boots splashing through puddles, voices clipped and urgent as they assessed the scene. "Ma'am, step back, we've got him." one said, his gloved hands gentle yet firm as he eased the boy onto a stretcher. Ilara relinquished her hold reluctantly, her fingers lingering on the child's damp jacket, a silent vow etched in that touch. She watched as they worked. The team's movements a blur of efficiency amid the chaos. IV lines snaking into tiny veins, oxygen masks fogging with each labored inhale. The crowd murmured, some offering hesitant claps, others snapping photos with phones held aloft like voyeuristic torches. But Ilara felt their gazes shift from the rescue to her, the drenched girl in threadbare clothes, now just an anomaly in the aftermath. A police officer approached, notepad in hand, his expression a mix of gratitude and suspicion. "You the one who got him out? Name?" She mumbled, "Ilara," her voice barely audible over the downpour, then backed away as questions piled on. The weight of attention was suffocating. She wasn't used to being seen, let alone as a savior. Slipping her backpack over one shoulder, she melted into the fringes, the rain masking her retreat toward the hospital lights, glowing in the distance like a hesitant beacon. The emergency room entrance loomed under a canopy of harsh fluorescence, their buzz a constant undercurrent to the night's fatigue. Ilara hesitated at the automatic doors, the automatic whoosh parting to release a wave of antiseptic sharpness that stung her nostrils, undercut by the faint underlying bitterness of illness and bleach. Inside, the air was warmer, almost oppressively so, carrying the soft symphony of beeping monitors and muffled conversations from curtained bays. Nurses in scrubs hurried past, clipboards clutched like shields, their faces lined with the quiet exhaustion of those who mended the broken hour after hour. She followed the stretcher's path, drawn by an invisible thread, her soaked boots leaving faint trails on the linoleum that gleamed under the relentless lights. No one stopped her at first. In the ER's controlled frenzy, strays like her blended into the periphery, just another shadow amid the gurneys and IV stands. The hospital staff operated in a world of their own, one society often viewed through a lens of detached professionalism, misunderstanding the raw humanity that pulsed beneath their starched uniforms. To the outside, they were the gatekeepers of life and death, cold clinicians who triaged suffering with checklists and charts, their empathy eroded by endless shifts and bureaucratic chains. Whispers in waiting rooms painted them as overworked drones, more interested in protocols than people, their compassion a luxury they couldn't afford amid the ceaseless influx of pain. Yet here, in the sterile corridors where the air hummed with the low drone of ventilators, Ilara glimpsed the truth. These were souls forged in quiet fires, their toughness a veil over wounds that never fully healed. A young nurse paused to adjust a patient's blanket, her hand lingering, with a tenderness that spoke of her own losses, perhaps a child she'd once held through fevered nights. The doctors, with their stethoscopes like pendants of duty, exchanged glances heavy with unspoken grief, the weight of decisions that haunted their dreams. Ilara hovered near the trauma bay, peering through the half-open doors where the boy was wheeled. The room was a cocoon of controlled urgency, overhead lights bathing the scene in unforgiving clarity, the sharp scent of iodine cutting through the air as a team swarmed. Male, approximately 5 years old, possible head trauma, vitals unstable. The lead paramedic reported, his voice steady but laced with the fatigue of too many calls. Dr. Harlan, a veteran physician with graying temples and eyes shadowed by sleepless vigils, leaned in, his gloved fingers probing gently. "Get me a CT stat," and page the pediatric surgeon. Nurses flanked him, one, Maria, her name tag slightly askew, starting an IV with practiced calm, while another monitored the boy's oxygen saturation, the monitor's beep a metronome to their rhythm. They moved as one, A hierarchy born of necessity, nurses as the frontline anchors, doctors directing the flow, head nurses overseeing like silent sentinels, ensuring no crack in the facade. But beneath the precision lay fractures the world rarely saw. Maria's hands trembled faintly as she wiped the boy's brow, her mind flashing to her niece lost to a similar accident years ago, a reminder of how the ER devoured pieces of you with every shift. Dr. Harlan, often chided for his brusque bedside manner, paused to whisper reassurances to the unconscious child, his voice cracking just enough to betray the father he'd never been, estranged by the demands of his calling. The staff's silence was their judgment, not of malice, but of survival. They judged the chaos outside, the drivers who sped without care, the systems that failed families before they even arrived. Society saw them as impersonal machines, but in truth, they were the misunderstood guardians, their compassion a fierce, hidden flame that burned brighter in the face of despair. Ilara, watching from the doorway, felt a kinship in their overlooked resolve, much like her own, buried under layers of neglect. As the team stabilized the boy, a head nurse, Elena, spotted Ilara's silhouette. Her approach was measured, the soft squeak of her shoes on the floor, the only sound breaking the bay's tension. "You the one who pulled him out? We heard from the paramedics." Ilara nodded, her green eyes downcast, the chill of her wet clothes seeping deeper now in the hospital's warmth. Eleanor's gaze softened, seeing not a vagrant, but a girl carrying the same quiet burden they all did, the moral ache of witnessing suffering and acting despite the cost. "Come on, let's get you dried off. You're part of this now." She led Ilara to a side room, handing her a towel and a spare scrub set, the fabric soft against her skin for the first time in months. In that small gesture, the ER's walls began to close around her, not as barriers, but as an unexpected embrace. The boy's cries from earlier echoed in Ilara's mind, stirring the guilt of her brother's absence. But here, amid the beeps and whispers, she sensed a turning point, a slow unraveling of isolation that neither she nor the staff could yet foresee. The rain outside tapped insistently against the windows, a reminder that the storm was far from over. Ilara sat on the edge of a stiff vinyl chair in the small staff lounge, the towel Elena had given her draped over her shoulders like a makeshift cape. The room was a sanctuary of muted chaos, vending machines humming faintly in the corner, their fluorescent glow casting long shadows across the scuffed linoleum floor. The air here was thicker, laced with the comforting aroma of stale coffee brewing in a pot that had seen better days, mingling with the ever-present antiseptic that clung to everything. Her new scrubs, oversized and pale blue, hung loosely on her frame, the fabric still carrying the faint warmth of a dryer she hadn't known in years. She rubbed her arms, chasing away the chill that lingered not just from the rain, but from the adrenaline's slow retreat, leaving her hollow and exposed. Across from her, Eleanor settled into a worn armchair, her posture relaxed yet attentive, the lines around her eyes deepening as she studied Ilara. The head nurse's uniform was crisp, but up close, Ilara noticed the subtle wear, a frayed cuff on one sleeve, a name tag pinned slightly askew from hours of hurried adjustments. "The boy's stable for now," Elena said softly, her voice a steady anchor amid the distant clamor of the ER. "CT shows a concussion, some bruising, but no internal bleeding. You're a hero, you know that." Ilara shook her head, her damp hair falling forward to curtain her face. Heroes didn't sleep under bridges or scavenge for meals. They had families, homes, names that mattered. She mumbled something about just doing what anyone would, but the words tasted like a lie. No one else had moved. That truth gnawed at her, stirring the old guilt like sediment in still water. The lounge door swung open with a pneumatic hiss, admitting Dr. Harlan and Maria, their faces etched with the quiet intensity of the shift's demands. Harlan carried 2 steaming mugs, handing one to Ilara with a nod that felt almost paternal. The coffee was bitter, scalding her tongue, but its warmth spread through her chest, easing the knot there. Maria slid into a seat beside Elena, her hands folding in her lap as if to still their faint tremor. "We don't get many like you coming through these doors," she said, her tone gentle, probing without pressure. "Most kids your age. They keep to the shadows. What made you stop today?" Ilara's gaze drifted to the window, where rain traced erratic paths down the glass, blurring the world outside into a watercolor of greys. She hesitated, the words catching in her throat like thorns. How to explain the echo of her brother's cry in that boy's whimpers, the way the crash had ripped open the scar of abandonment, forcing her to confront the runner she'd become. As the conversation lulled, a new sound pierced the room, the sharp, insistent beep of a monitor escalating from the trauma bay down the hall. Elena's radio crackled to life, static underscoring a nurse's urgent voice. "Code blue in pediatrics. Boy from the wreck, he's crashing." The air thickened instantly, the lounge's warmth turning oppressive as the team sprang into motion. Harlan was first out the door, his mug abandoned on the table, coffee sloshing over the rim. Maria followed, her chair scraping harshly against the floor, while Elena paused to squeeze Ilara's shoulder, a fleeting touch that conveyed both reassurance and inclusion. "Stay here if you want," she murmured, but her eyes urged otherwise. Ilara's heart lurched, the boy's fragile form flashing in her mind. She couldn't stay, not when the pull of that cry still resonated in her bones. She trailed them down the corridor, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering slightly, casting intermittent shadows that danced like specters on the walls. The hallway stretched endlessly, lined with carts of supplies and half-open doors revealing glimpses of other struggles. An elderly man wheezing under an oxygen mask, a mother rocking a feverish infant in the dim glow of a nightlight. The antiseptic scent sharpened here, undercut by the metallic hint of fear sweat from staff rushing past. Ilara's bare feet, her boots left by the entrance, padded silently on the cool tile, making her feel even smaller amid the bustle. As they reached the bay, the scene unfolded in stark clarity. The boy lay pale on the gurney, his small chest rising and falling erratically, IV lines tangled like vines around his arms. A crash cart loomed nearby, its drawers ajar, defibrillator pads at the ready. The monitors wailed, red lights pulsing in sync with the chaos, the air humming with the low murmur of prayers from a chaplain slipping in quietly. Dr. Harlan barked orders, his voice steady but edged with strain. "Epi, 1 milligram? Push it now, and get the vent ready." Maria's hands flew, drawing up the syringe with precision born of muscle memory, her breath coming in controlled bursts. The team encircled the bed, a living barrier of scrubs and determination. Nurses adjusting lines, a respiratory therapist prepping the tube, techs monitoring vitals. Elena coordinated from the periphery, her presence a calming force amid the storm. But beneath the protocol, Ilara saw the cracks, the way Harlan's jaw clenched as he compressed the boy's chest, each push a reluctant violation of innocence. Maria's eyes glistening as she whispered, "Come on, little guy, fight for us." Society judged them as detached, but here was their truth, compassion forged in the crucible of repeated loss. Their toughness, a shield for hearts that broke anew with every code. Ilara hovered at the edge, her hands twisting the hem of her scrub top, the fabric bunching under her fingers. The boy's face, so like her brother's in its vulnerability, triggered a flood of memories. The night social services had come, lights flashing like these monitors, her screams ignored as he was pried from her arms. Guilt surged, hot and unrelenting, mingling with the fear that this child, too, might slip away because of the world's indifference. She stepped forward, unbidden, her voice small but clear. "He likes stories. I told him one on the way here. about a brave knight who wakes from a deep sleep. The room paused, breaths held, the team's eyes flicking to her. Harlan nodded almost imperceptibly, continuing compressions. Maria leaned in, her voice soft as she echoed the tale, weaving words around the beeps. In that moment, Ilara's isolation fractured. She wasn't just a witness, but part of the rhythm, her moral core aligning with theirs. The tension crested as the boy's heart stuttered back to rhythm, the monitor's wail softening to a steady beep. Relief washed over the bay like a collective exhale, shoulders slumping, hands lingering on his forehead in silent gratitude. But the danger wasn't over. The crash had unearthed complications, a hidden bleed that demanded surgery, pulling the staff into a whirlwind of pre-op checks and consultations. Ilara felt the weight of it all, her presence now a quiet anchor, drawing curious glances from the team. Whispers followed. Who was this girl? How had she known just what to say? As the boy was wheeled toward the OR, Eleanor pulled her aside, her expression a mix of awe and concern. You saved him twice today, but staying. It means facing more than rain out there. Ilara met her gaze, the trembling in her hands subsiding into resolve. For the first time, the ER's walls felt less like a cage and more like a hearth, warm against the cold void she'd known. The rain outside had eased to a drizzle, pattering softly against the panes, but inside, the emotional currents swirled deeper, hinting at revelations yet to come. Ilara's act had stirred something profound in the staff, a reminder of the children they'd failed to save, the quiet heroes who slipped through the cracks. As the night deepened, the hospital's heartbeat pulsed on, enveloping her in its unyielding embrace. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The operating room doors swung shut with a decisive thud, sealing the boy away from the corridor's watchful eyes, leaving Ilara adrift in the hallway's sterile hush. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their relentless glare casting a pallor on the faces of the staff who lingered nearby, wiping sweat from brows and exchanging glances heavy with unspoken relief. The air was thick with the sharp bite of surgical prep solution, undercut by the faint, acrid trace of adrenaline that still lingered on their scrubs. Ilara leaned against the cool wall, her borrowed scrubs now rumpled and clinging slightly from the lounge's humidity, her pulse a steady thrum in her ears that matched the distant rhythm of monitors echoing from adjacent rooms. Elena stood beside her, a quiet pillar, her hand resting lightly on Ilara's arm, a touch that grounded her amid the swirl of emotions threatening to pull her under. Minutes stretched into an eternity, the corridor a tunnel of white tile and shadowed alcoves where gurneys waited like silent sentinels. Soft footsteps approached, and Dr. Harlan emerged from a side conference room, his surgical cap still perched askew, eyes shadowed by the weight of the procedure. "He's through the worst," he said, his voice low and measured, carrying the gravel of exhaustion. "The bleed was contained, but he's fragile. It'll be touch and go for the next few hours." Maria joined them, her face flushed from assisting in the OR, a faint smear of iodine on her sleeve like a badge of battle. She offered Ilara a small smile, tentative yet warm, as if bridging the gap between stranger and ally. "You were right about the story. It steadied us all, even if he couldn't hear it." Ilara nodded, the praise settling uneasily in her chest, stirring the guilt that her brother's memory had been invoked not for him, but for this child. She wanted to vanish again, to slip back into the rain's anonymity, but the pull of the boy's labored breaths, imagined now in the silence, held her fast. The tension began to coil as the night shift deepened, the hospital's pulse quickening with the influx of new cases. A domestic call filtering in from the ambulance bay, its sirens a wail that pierced the walls like a warning. Elena's radio crackled intermittently, pulling her away for triage duties, leaving Ilara with Harlan and Maria in a small waiting alcove off the surgical wing. The space was cramped, furnished with plastic chairs that creaked under weight, a coffee machine gurgling its last dregs into a pot that smelled faintly burnt. Harlan sank into a seat, rubbing his temples, the lines there etching deeper. Kids like him. They remind you why we do this, he murmured, more to himself than to them. Ilara perched on the edge of her chair, her fingers tracing the armrest's worn grooves, the texture rough against her skin. She sensed the unspoken fractures in his words, the moral conflicts that mirrored her own, the quiet heroism of staying when everything urged flight. But the fragile peace shattered with the arrival of footsteps echoing down the hall. Purposeful and unyielding, a social worker, clipboard in hand, rounded the corner, her heels clicking sharply on the tile like the ticking of a clock counting down. Accompanied by a uniformed officer, she scanned the group with professional detachment, her eyes landing on Ilara. "We're looking for the minor involved in the accident rescue. Ilara, is it? We need to discuss your situation. Group home records show you're a runaway." The words landed like a blow, the air in the alcove turning thick and oppressive, the coffee's aroma now cloying. Ilara's heart stuttered, adrenaline surging hot through her veins, her hands clenching into fists to hide their tremble. The officer shifted, his belt creaking with the weight of his gear, his presence a reminder of the system that had torn her from her brother, the indifference that had left her adrift. Guilt flooded her anew, not just for the past, but for the fear that her involvement might endanger the boy, drawing scrutiny to his fragile world. Maria stood first, her posture straightening like a shield, the tremor in her hands now channeled into resolve. "She's not going anywhere until we know the boy's stable. She saved his life twice." Harlan rose beside her, his voice steady, laced with the authority of years spent advocating in these very halls. "This isn't the time for bureaucracy. She's under our care now." The social worker hesitated, her pen pausing mid-note, the fluorescent light glinting off her glasses as she assessed the united front. Society's judgment loomed in her questions, the assumptions that Ilara was a liability, a street kid more trouble than she was worth, her goodness overlooked in favor of protocols and files. But the staff's compassion burned through, their toughness cracking open to reveal the humanity the world misjudged. Not cold clinicians, but fierce protectors, who saw in Ilara the same overlooked souls they fought for daily. Ilara's breath came shallow, the alcove's walls closing in, the soft beeps from nearby rooms mocking her rising panic. Memories assaulted her. The cold grip of hands pulling her brother away, the slam of doors that echoed her isolation. She wanted to run, to dissolve into the night beyond the windows, where rain now lashed against the glass in renewed fury. But determination rooted her. This boy, with his blonde curls and trusting eyes, was a second chance she couldn't forfeit. "I won't leave him," she whispered, her voice gaining strength, green eyes meeting the social workers with a quiet fire. The confrontation escalated as voices rose, the officer radioing for backup protocols, the air humming with tension that vibrated like the building's hidden vents. Elena returned then, drawn by the commotion, her presence tipping the balance as she invoked hospital policy, her words a calm barrage that bought time. In the standoff, fear coiled tighter in Ilara's gut, adrenaline sharpening her senses, the sterile chill on her skin, the metallic tang of fear in her mouth, the collective heartbeat of the staff syncing with her own. Guilt whispered that she was the danger now, her past a shadow that could unravel everything, but their support ignited a spark of belonging, however tentative. The social worker relented slightly, agreeing to a temporary hold pending the boy's recovery, but the moral danger lingered. A storm brewing in the paperwork, and inquiries that threatened to drag Ilara back into the void. As the group dispersed, Harlan placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch paternal and reassuring. "We've got your back, kid. That's what family does here." The word, family, hung in the air, heavy with promise and peril, as the hospital's night deepened. The rain's rhythm outside, a counterpoint to the escalating heartbeat within. Hours blurred in the vigil, the alcove becoming a makeshift command center where the staff rotated shifts, bringing updates from the recovery room. The boys' vitals held steady, but complications loomed. A possible infection from the crash's debris, demanding antibiotics and watchful eyes. Ilara refused to leave. Her determination, a quiet force that drew the team closer, their conversations turning personal in the lulls. Maria sharing tales of her niece's laughter, Harlan admitting the divorce that had cost him his own child. Each revelation peeled back layers, showing Ilara that their apparent toughness masked wounds akin to hers, redemption sought in every life they touched. Yet the external pressure mounted. Calls from child services echoed through the halls, whispers of mandatory reporting that could separate her from this fragile sanctuary. Fear gnawed at her edges, but so did hope, the staff's compassion weaving a net against the fall. As dawn crept toward the windows, tinting the fluorescence with a pale grey, a nurse from pediatrics approached with news. The boys' parents were en route, identified from the sedan's registration, their arrival promising answers, and perhaps more danger. Ilara's pulse quickened, the moral conflict sharpening. Would they see her as savior or intruder? The staff encircled her subtly, a human barrier of scrubs and resolve, their humanity shining through the exhaustion. In that moment, amid the beeps and whispers, Ilara felt the rising tension crest towards something profound, a late truth waiting to surface, binding her fate to theirs in ways none could yet foresee. The rain slowed to a mist, but the storm within raged on, fueled by fear, guilt, and an unyielding will to protect. The first hints of dawn filtered through the narrow windows of the surgical wing, painting the corridor in a watery light that softened the harsh edges of the fluorescent strips above. The rain had finally surrendered to a reluctant quiet, leaving only the occasional drip from eaves to punctuate the hospital's nocturnal symphony. The steady beep of monitors, the muffled shuffle of feet on tile, the distant sigh of an elevator descending like a weary breath. Ilara remained in the alcove, her body curled into the unforgiving plastic chair, exhaustion pulling at her eyelids even as her mind raced. The scrubs she wore felt like borrowed armor now, stiff and unfamiliar against her skin, but they anchored her to this place, to the people who had chosen to stand with her against the encroaching tide of judgment. Elena returned from a brief rounds check, her steps measured, carrying a styrofoam cup of lukewarm tea that steamed faintly in the cooler morning air. She handed it to Ilara without a word, the ceramic warmth seeping through the thin barrier to chase away the chill that had settled in her bones. "Parents are here," Elena said softly, her voice threading through the hush like a lifeline. "They're in with the social worker now, piecing together what happened." Ilara's fingers tightened around the cup, the heat bordering on pain, mirroring the knot twisting in her stomach. Fear slithered through her veins, cold and insistent. Fear that the parents would see her not as the girl who pulled their son from the wreckage, but as an interloper, a runaway whose touch might taint their fragile reunion. Guilt amplified it, whispering that her involvement had only complicated the boy's fragile hold on life, drawing the system's cold gaze once more. The alcove's door creaked open, admitting Maria and a pediatric nurse Ilara hadn't met yet, their faces drawn with the night's toll. Whispers followed them. The parents, a young couple hollowed by grief, had arrived in a flurry of questions and tears, their hands clasped as if to ward off the nightmare. But beneath the relief, Tension simmered, the father's voice rising in the conference room down the hall, demanding answers about the street kid the paramedics had mentioned. Ilara's breath hitched, adrenaline sharpening her senses, the faint antiseptic tang sharpening in her nostrils, the cool tile under her bare feet sending shivers upward. Her heart beat a muffled drum against her ribs. She wanted to flee, to dissolve into the dawn's mist outside, but determination rooted her, a quiet fire born from the boy's trusting weight in her arms during the rescue. She couldn't abandon him now, not when her own past screamed for redemption. Dr. Harlan joined them moments later, his white coat rumpled, stethoscope dangling like a talisman around his neck. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his presence a steady bulwark. They're angry. At the driver, at the roads, at everything. But they're grateful. The social worker's pushing for your placement evaluation, Ilara. Says it's protocol. The words landed heavily, the air in the alcove thickening with unspoken conflict. Maria's eyes flashed with protective fervor, her hands balling at her sides. Protocol be damned. She's the reason he's breathing. We've all lost too much to let the system chew her up. Harlan nodded, his jaw set, the moral weight of his words evident in the faint tremor of his voice. They were the misunderstood ones, these healers, seen by the world as rule-bound functionaries. Yet here they defied the very structures that bound them, their compassion a rebellion against indifference. The confrontation escalated as footsteps echoed closer, the social worker reappearing with the parents in tow. The mother, her eyes red-rimmed and shadowed, clutched a tissue while the father stood rigid, his gaze sweeping the group before locking on Ilara. The corridor seemed to narrow, the fluorescent hum intensifying like a gathering storm, the soft beeps from recovery rooms fading into a tense silence. "You pulled my son out?" the father asked, his voice rough with emotion, stepping forward until the air between them crackled. Ilara rose slowly, her legs unsteady, meeting his eyes with a resolve that masked her inner turmoil. "Yes, he was. He was crying. I couldn't leave him." The mother's hand flew to her mouth, a sob escaping, but the social worker interjected, clipboard raised like a shield. "This young woman is a documented runaway. Until we assess her stability—" Harlan cut her off, his tone unyielding yet laced with the quiet authority of experience. "Assess all you want, but she's not leaving until we say so. She's family here." The word hung again, heavier now, drawing nods from Maria and Elena, their united front a wall of scrubs and determination. The father hesitated, his anger fracturing as he searched Ilara's face, seeing not a threat, but the raw vulnerability that mirrored his son's. Adrenaline coursed through Ilara, her hands trembling at her sides, guilt surging that her shadowed past might shatter this moment. But determination held her steady, her breath shallow and focused, the warmth of the teacup, a reminder of the hands extended to her. In the charged pause, the late revelation unfolded like a quiet dawn breaking. The mother stepped closer, her gaze softening as she reached out, hesitating before gently touching Ilara's arm. "You remind me of my sister," she whispered, tears tracing paths down her cheeks. "She was like you, alone, fighting for everyone but herself. She died young, pulling a child from a house fire years ago. No one saw her goodness until it was too late." The words pierced Ilara, her own guilt echoing in the confession, the boy's face now symbolic of the sibling she'd lost, a bridge across their shared wounds. The staff's eyes widened, Harlan's hand pausing mid-gesture, Maria's breath catching. For them, the boy represented every pediatric case that haunted their nights, the innocence they'd fought to save, only to lose to the world's cruelties. Ilara's act had unearthed their buried grief, redefining her not as an outsider, but as a mirror to their unspoken losses, binding them in a tapestry of quiet heroism. The social worker faltered, her professional armor cracking under the weight of the truth, while the parents enveloped Ilara in a tentative embrace, the mother's hug warm and enveloping, carrying the faint scent of rain-dampened coat and relief. Harlan cleared his throat, pulling a small embroidered pin from his pocket. A hospital crest, simple silver thread on blue fabric, worn from years on his own lapel. "This is for those who belong," he said, affixing it to Ilara's scrub pocket with steady hands. "It means protection, from us, always." Elena added a spare ID bracelet from her wrist, its plastic band cool against Ilara's skin, engraved with the staff's emblem, a subtle vow of inclusion. Maria pressed a keycard into her palm. Access to the lounge and beyond, her smile fierce. "You're one of us now, no running." The symbol settled over Ilara like a mantle, easing the fear that had gripped her, transforming guilt into a shared burden, determination into belonging. The corridor's tension dissolved into murmurs of agreement, the parents nodding through tears, the social worker retreating with promises of leniency. As the group dispersed toward the recovery room, where the boys' steady breaths awaited, Ilara felt the moral conflict shift. Redemption not in isolation, but in community. The ER's fluorescent glow now a hearth rather than a glare. The dawn light strengthened outside, casting golden edges on the windows, a poetic promise that the storm had passed, leaving hearts intertwined in unexpected love. Yet the day held more trials, the weight of acceptance, a new anchor in her wandering soul. The sun climbed higher, its rays piercing the hospital windows like tentative fingers, warming the alcove where Ilara sat, the embroidered pin glinting faintly on her scrub pocket. The air in the corridor had shifted from the night's heavy hush to a subdued bustle. Carts rattling with fresh linens, the soft murmur of voices as day shift staff arrived, their footsteps echoing with renewed purpose. The antiseptic scent lingered, now mingled with the faint, comforting aroma of breakfast trays being wheeled from the kitchen, oatmeal and toast, simple offerings that grounded the space in everyday resilience. Ilara traced the ID bracelet's edge with her thumb, its cool plastic a tangible reminder of the vows exchanged in the dawn's fragile light. Yet beneath the calm, tension simmered, a quiet undercurrent pulling at her resolve, like the tide she could never outrun. The parents lingered in the recovery room, their presence a bridge between Ilara's shadowed world and the boy's fragile awakening. Through the half-open door, she glimpsed them, the mother seated by the bed, her hand enveloping the child's small one, while the father paced slowly, his shoulders less rigid now, the anger from earlier softened by gratitude. The boy's eyelids fluttered, a weak groan escaping as monitors beeped steadily, their rhythm a lullaby of survival. Elena guided Ilara closer, her touch light on the girl's elbow, steering her into the room with the gentle insistence of someone who understood the weight of thresholds. "He's asking for the rain girl," the mother said, her voice thick with emotion, eyes meeting Ilara's with a depth that pierced through the formalities. The words stirred something profound in Ilara, a flicker of recognition, the boy's hazy memory of her face amid the chaos, binding them in a thread finer than blood. But the morning brought its own escalation, the hospital's machinery grinding against the human heart. The social worker returned, flanked by an administrator whose clipboard bore the stark lines of policy and precedent. Their voices carried from the hallway, clipped and insistent, discussing Ilara's status. No guardian, no fixed address. A file marked with the red flags of runaway and orphan. "We can't just integrate her into staff routines," the administrator argued, his tone measured but unyielding, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on his face. "Liability, protocols, it's not sustainable." Fear coiled in Ilara's chest, sharp and familiar, her hands pressing flat against her thighs to still their tremble. The room's warmth turned stifling, the beeps accelerating like her pulse, guilt resurfacing in waves. Her presence here, a disruption, might unravel the boy's peace, echoing the system's cruelty that had stolen her brother. She edged toward the door, the instinct to flee rising like bile, But Maria blocked her path subtly, her eyes fierce with unspoken solidarity. Dr. Harlan entered then, his white coat a banner of authority, drawing the officials into a huddle just outside. The confrontation unfolded in low tones that vibrated through the walls. Harlan's voice rising in defense, invoking the boy's testimony, the child's mumbled thanks for the night story that had steadied him through the haze of pain meds. Maria joined, her words measured but laced with the raw edge of personal loss, recounting how Ilara's intuition had mirrored the instincts that saved lives in the ER's frenzy. Elena coordinated from the sidelines, her radio silent for once, her presence a calm force redirecting the flow. The parents interjected, the father's hand on his wife's shoulder as he declared, "She saved our son. If she's family to you, she's family to us." The air thrummed with the moral danger of it all, the clash of compassion against cold procedure, the staff's toughness cracking to reveal the humanity society so often overlooked. Ilara watched from the doorway, adrenaline sharpening every detail, the administrator's furrowed brow, the social worker's hesitant pause, the faint scent of the boy's saline drip cutting through the tension. As voices peaked, the late revelation deepened, weaving through the fray like sunlight through cracks. The mother rose, crossing to Ilara with deliberate steps, her embrace pulling the girl into a warmth scented with hospital soap and quiet tears. "My sister, she was you," she whispered again, her breath warm against Ilara's ear. Abandoned young, always the one to step in when no one else would. She pulled that child from the fire, but the smoke took her. We buried her with no one to claim her light. The words hung, heavy with shared grief. The boy's symbolic weight now clear, not just a rescue, but an echo of lost siblings, a chance for redemption the mother had long mourned. Harlan overheard, his eyes misting as he nodded, the boy reminding him of his estranged daughter, the cases that haunted his nights like ghosts. Maria confessed softly, her voice breaking, of a nephew lost to neglect, the ER's failures etched in her soul. For the staff, Ilara embodied their unspoken wounds, the overlooked youth they patched but couldn't always save, redefining her act as a mirror to their collective heartache. The revelation shifted the room's gravity, the officials faltering, their clipboards lowering as compassion pierced the protocols. In that suspended moment, the symbols of acceptance solidified, a quiet ritual amid the beeps and breaths. Harlan adjusted the pin on Ilara's pocket, his fingers steady despite the tremor in his voice. "This crest means you're guarded here. Nights in the on-call room, meals from our kitchen, a path forward if you want it." Elena slipped the bracelet higher on her wrist, its clasp clicking like a promise. "And this, it's access to us, all of us." Maria added a small laminated card from her pocket, a staff volunteer badge with Ilara's name scrawled in Sharpie, granting her a role in the pediatric wing, reading stories, holding hands through the fear. The parents pressed a simple silver locket into her palm, engraved with the boy's initial, a family heirloom now shared. "For the one who brought him back," the father said, his grip firm, eyes reflecting the dawn's gold. Ilara's hands closed around them, the metals cool against her skin, easing the guilt into something bearable, transforming isolation into belonging. Fear receded, determination blooming into quiet hope, the ER's community enfolding her like the walls themselves. The confrontation resolved in murmurs of compromise, the social worker agreeing to supervised integration, the administrator retreating with notes of exception. As the group gathered around the boy's bed, his eyes opening fully for the first time, a weak smile breaking through the pallor, the room filled with a profound silence, broken only by his soft, "Thank you, Rain Girl." Ilara knelt beside him, her voice steady as she continued the night's tale, the staff and parents listening, their faces illuminated by the morning light, the hospital's atmosphere wrapped around them. The gentle hum of life support, the warmth seeping from sun-warmed windows, the collective exhale of hearts mended in unexpected ways. Redemption unfolded not in grand gestures, but in this circle, moral conflicts resolved through shared humanity, the overlooked finding voice in the compassion of those once misunderstood. Hours later, as the day shifted into afternoon, Ilara stepped into the lounge for the first time as one of them, the keycard granting entry to a world of respite and resolve. The pin weighed lightly on her chest, a beacon against the wandering soul she'd been. Outside, the streets dried under the sun, the crash site cleared away, but the scars remained, in hearts, in bonds forged from rain and ruin. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Ilara reach more people who still believe in humanity. In the quiet aftermath, as the hospital's rhythms carried on, beeps fading into the background, footsteps echoing with purpose, the true depth of that morning settled like dust after a storm. Ilara, once a shadow adrift in the rain, found herself anchored in a community of silent warriors, their compassion a light piercing the overlooked corners of the world. The boys' laughter, tentative at first, echoed down the halls in days to come, a melody woven from threads of loss and love. The ER staff, with their hidden wounds and unyielding hearts, surrounded her not just with protection, but with the quiet heroism that redefined family. In the fluorescent glow and antiseptic hush, humanity revealed itself, not in perfection, but in the trembling hands that reached out, the moral fires that burned through judgment and silence. What began in chaos ended in embrace, a testament to the goodness that endures, overlooked yet unbreakable. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of Orphan pulled a child from a car crash. The ER staff surrounded her with love. See you in the next one.